If you've been on social media or even out on the street, you've probably heard the term overdevelopment. Anytime a two-story building is proposed in an inner city suburb, you get NIMBYs clamoring saying it'll turn Mortdale into Hong Kong. Obviously, at this point you're expecting me to say, it's a load of crap. Anyone that says it is true hasn't got their head screwed on straight. I'm not going to say that though, because it is real. There are parts of Sydney where development has gone too far. And to help make that point, I've brought Shareth from Building Beautifully to come help me out, who's currently sitting there playing with a drone. So, let's start with a definition. For our purposes, overdevelopment is development that occurs in an area above what that area can sustain, both in terms of population, as well as infrastructure, economics, and climate. So, what does this look like?
We're here in Nirimba Field. This land used to be part of RAF Station Schofield and later a general aviation airport, but now it's becoming houses. What's just out of view is Eastern Creek, which is a tributary of the Hawkesbury Nepean River, which should immediately set off some red flags. It floods a lot here, and real bad. This land we're on, in a probable maximum flood event, there will be meters and meters of water above our heads, and we're building houses here. This area is part of the Northwest Growth Area and it's one of the main growth areas for Sydney, with two more being the Southwest and Aerotropolis areas, both of which are also on floodplains. A significant portion of Western Sydney's new housing stock is being built on floodplains. We are living in the era of climate change, where severe floods are going to be more and more common, and it's as if we're doing our very best to make sure as many people are in harm's way as possible.
But don't worry, it gets worse. Western Sydney is hotter than the east. A study from 2023 found that in summer, on days in Western Sydney where reached temperatures of 35 degrees Celsius or more, it was on average 5 degrees cooler in the east. And not only is it hotter now, it's getting hotter. By 2039, most of Western Sydney is expected to have an extra 10 to 20 days per year above 35 degrees Celsius and lose 5 to 20 nights below 2 degrees Celsius. And this is where the vast majority of new homes are being built, 30 to 40 kilometres from the CBD. If you look at the projected population growth of Sydney by local government area, it's bleak. Woollahra will only see another 2,967 people by 2041, and in Waverley, that's 2,633 people. And the Inner West, it's only 12,420 people, which sounds like a fair few, right? Well, Blacktown expects an extra 110,000 people. Campertown and Penrith are 54,000. And Camden, nowhere near Sydney CBD and with no heavy rail connection, at least nowadays, is expecting an extra 90,000.
In fact, if you add up the expected population growth of every LGA east of Parramatta, you get 369,572, and that's almost entirely carried by just 3 LGAs, those being Canterbury Bankstown, Sydney and Ryde. And for comparison, west of Parramatta, that figure is 763,416, nearly twice as much as the east. And outside of climate and weather issues, there are bigger concerns. Do you know where most of Sydney's jobs are? They're in the east. 29% of workers in Western Sydney commuted elsewhere for jobs. And how did most of them get there? Statistically, by car. While a large portion did also commute by public transport, that's still not that great, considering it's 50 minutes to get from Blacktown to Central and 1 hour 20 from Penrith. And that's station to station. More than likely, the average commute is far longer.
Guess what else isn't in the West? Basic amenities. Nothing I can think of better exemplifies this than Pondi, aka Penrith Beach. It's some sand on a freshwater lake, and the only reason it exists is because people want to go to the beach, but if you're from the West, it's such a long trip. So instead, we get a fake beach. And while it's kind of sad, there are other important things that the West lacks, like schools, hospitals, public transport, etc. While governments are doing their part to actually rectify this, it doesn't address the fundamental issue, that development in Sydney's West is just not appropriate, it's overdevelopment. I also recorded this as a voiceover, entirely as an artistic choice, and not because Nirimba is haunted by a ghost that makes microphones stop working apparently. You know where it's cooler, not on a floodplain, has a job surplus, and plentiful transport links and amenities? Sydney's East, which I would actually argue suffers from underdevelopment. As we've demonstrated, Sydney's East just isn't pulling its weight. All of the fastest growing suburbs are west of Parramatta, not in the east where I am now. And is that because all the areas east of Parramatta are full? Well, look around me. Do they look full? Because if it does, I'm not actually in Sydney's East. I'm in Balcombe Hills, an area northwest of Parramatta in the Hills District, an area only served by buses with no heavy rail connection whatsoever.
Here's what Sydney's east looks like. We're in Randwick. Just over there is a tram that'll take you to the city in 30 minutes. The beach isn't too far away, and there's many public and high schools, shops, pubs, cinemas, and so on to boot. Fundamentally, every amenity anyone would ever need is here, and it doesn't flood, nor is it likely to become an oven in the coming years. And yet there are so many suburbs that meet all of these criteria that are in the east, are close to the city, and look like this. Annandale, Balmain, Leichhardt, Marrickville, Kingsford, Bondi, Mossman, Willoughby, Manly, and so on and so on. And by no means is it full when compared to cities around the world. Sydney is not very dense at all. Sydney's inner city areas are less dense than those of London and Paris, and the inner city density drops off faster, and the larger metropolitan area is less dense compared to foreign cities like San Francisco and Toronto. We can build more near the city, but we choose not to. Why?
Well, a few reasons. One is the notion of the Australian dream. People want land with a house for the wife, a yard for the kids, and a garage for dad. While in theory, that sounds lovely, like a lot of things, when taken to extreme, it's not great. The reality is, it's just not doable anymore, at least in Sydney, because we've run out of good land to build on. And now, all that's left are places we really shouldn't be building. The reality is that Sydney needs to go upwards and encourage density, but doing so is easier said than done because of you-know-who. NIMBYs, the lovable scamps, who kick up a stink anytime anything, anywhere is proposed. Whether for reasons of racism, classism, economics, or a perverse vision of heritage or environmentalism, NIMBYs in Sydney's east are well organised, and this is documented in the literature. People in Sydney's east are wealthier, better educated, have better connections, and better English proficiency.
While NIMBYs do exist in the West, they often lack a lot of these things, commonly wealth and English proficiency. The West is poorer and has a larger population of immigrants. This in turn means it's far easier to build there. That's why you get heritage conservation areas that cover almost all inner city areas, but they're incredibly rare in the West. It's not necessarily because the East is more historically important, it's just that the people there are better able to engage with the planning process.
But that's not really the focus of this video. With all we've shown thus far, it's hard to argue that when you hear overdevelopment from Eastern NIMBY groups, it's an accurate assessment of what's happening. Presuming that it's not an excuse to get development shut down, then it's just incorrect. By shutting down development near a train station in Mortdale or next to a hospital in French's Forest, you're just sending those homes out west. It's not overdevelopment to build medium and high density development in places near jobs and transport. It's overdevelopment to build low density on floodplains that cook people. Is there a solution? Well, we need to find one, because if we don't, a lot of people are going to get hurt. And if you don't care about that, well, it hurts our economy. So, what's my solution? Well, twofold. First off, we need to address the power imbalance between the East and the West. Partially, one method might be introducing rules that streamline development in Sydney's East, by eliminating or reducing public comment periods or auto-approving certain types of development. Or potentially creating rules that if local councils do not meet certain housing targets or affordability criteria, the state will intervene, similar to how the current government is doing it now. Another might be to create a mega council that controls the majority of Sydney's metropolis. This way, at least the West has some say on planning decisions made in the East, because the reality is, they have an effect. The issue is, it's easy to say we should do this or that, but the reality is, people don't like having their power taken away, so any attempts at reform will be an uphill battle. Another policy we could add would be a green belt. Sydney has tried this before. It was one of the defining features of the 1948 County of Cumberland Plan after all. Our proposal would be basically to take everywhere in the West that isn't developed and green belt it, basically banning any new development. This forces development to concentrate in areas that have already developed, ending our urban sprawl, protecting floodplains, and ensuring that the land that is used to grow our food is protected, because we kind of need that. But there is an issue with that, namely that developers probably wouldn't be too happy, and if we don't address the difficulty in developing in the East, well, we've either caused a massive housing crisis, worse than the one we already have, or we force the West to densify to Kowloon walled city levels, which is not what we want, especially if we want to address the socio-economic divide in Sydney. There is also an issue around infrastructure in the East. While yes, it's far better than the West, the East still has issues, and if we want to dramatically increase the population here, we'll need to put up a lot of cash to improve it. If anything, that's because it shuts down one of the NIMBY arguments, which is that new development will just make traffic worse, or overcrowded schools, ignoring the fact those issues are present in the West, just driving there is the only option, and you might only have one way to get out of your suburb. And if you're lucky, the school exists. And even luckier if it's not well over capacity. Just as a comparison, Randwick and Kensington primary schools are both near their enrolment cap. So yeah, they're at capacity. But if you look at Narimba from before, the primary school there is nearly double over its cap. And this repeats across the west. If you look at areas like Randwick, sure, it recently got a light rail station. But is that enough? If you want to add another 100,000 people here in the next 20 years, you need more than a tram and some buses. We'll need serious investment. Thankfully, a lot of areas like this were built around their tram networks. So planning out a tram network isn't exactly difficult, as long as you ignore the issues around NIMBYs and cost. The issue is, there needs to be heavy rail transit, which is more difficult. I have a video on the East Suburbs line in the works, but long story short, they've been trying since the John Whitten days, and only in 1979 did heavy rail branch west past St James. It's easy to say, just extend it, but the reality is, it'll be expensive. NIMBYs are likely to try and get shut down, because it'll bring overdevelopment, or crime, or whatever. Just look at what happened to Woollahra Railway Station, or the Bondi Beach Link. And governments often have to deal with a multitude of priorities. If you saw my Metro video, you'd be aware that one of the main reasons that the Northwest Rail Link got built over any other line was primarily politics. And actually, it was to keep the West on side with Labor. So there's the issue, is if we choose to upzone the East, well, we might have to cut spending in the West, or country, to do so. And for a government, that could mean losing the next election, especially considering that many areas in the West already suffer from infrastructure lag and desperately need the basic services that they should have already.
You can see why trying to come up with a solution is complex when it comes to urban planning and housing policy. There are just so many factors, and making a decision that affects one affects another. While we can't come up with a more detailed policy in this video, what we've mentioned here is the groundwork we need to build off. Because the reality is we can't continue sprawling outwards. It's just not sustainable. We need to create parity between the East and West when it comes to planning. And we need to concentrate development back in the East. Hopefully, politics doesn't get in the way, and some of this comes to fruition.
Also, you may have noticed at no point have we discussed housing and supply and its relation to housing prices. Because yes, it plays a role. The recent Productivity Commission's report makes that clear. If we allowed adequate housing supply to be built in Sydney's east, units on average will be 30 to 40% cheaper. But it doesn't matter to our argument, because housing supply could have no impact on prices, and this video will still exist, because homes need to be built, and as I've shown here, it's much better for them to be built near the CBD than miles from it. Also, if you bring up decentralisation and immigration, well, feel free, because it'll give me and Sheriff stuff to talk about in a future video. Because I'm sorry to tell you, but the reality is, they're not the silver bullets that you think they are. But that's a problem for our future selves. And well, with that, we end. If you enjoyed, a like and subscribe is always appreciated. You guys probably already are, but if you're not already subscribed, you can find Sheriff's channel in the description below. He's currently just hiding behind the camera. He covers a lot of the same topics I do. Otherwise, you can donate to my work through my Ko-fi in the description below. Otherwise, I'll see you on the next one.
Right, shout out the Ko-fi supporters. You know who they are.
There's Sheriff, there's Chris Topher.
Chris, hello Chris.
Oh, it's fucking good enough.
How did you say it, Woollahra?
You said Woollahra.
Ah, it's fine.
Definitely not Woollahra.
I have an excuse, I'm not a local.
Just so you can get made fun of in the comments. But if you put this bit at the end, they'll already
Yeah,
know.
man, were you
like, did you see the bloopers? Like, I already got corrected. You're wrong.
I could put it in the video, specifically saying I know I mispronounced it, and people would still comment. Also, I still have one more line.
Yeah.
I know, there's a few more sections we'll film here.
Okay. Try to get it in one take because it's so hot here.
Yeah, I know.
So bad.
I think I'm doing the heat part, but I think we can...
I'm just gonna impromptu something right now. It is so hot here right now. This is just B-roll. This is just like blooper B-roll, but this is so insanely hot. It's like 25 degrees right now and I'm sweating. And it's like 10:30 a.m. in autumn.
It's like 70% humidity or something.
This is insane. Okay, let's do this.
What do you think of Schofields?
It's shit. It's hot.
Yeah?
I don't want to be here. It's 25 degrees. It's like 70% humidity. We are sweaty as all hell. Why are you going for like a crotch shot?
Oh, it's nowhere near your crotch.
Oh, it's wild how it's sharing that track.
I'll say something.
Yeah. What are your thoughts?
It is just so insanely hot here. This is terrible. I hate it.
And it's only 25 today.
Guys, don't invest in Schofields. It's a bad option. Welcome to Angus Invests. Don't buy land in Schofields. Buy land in Randwick. And then hold on to it. Don't sell it to developers. Let it get real expensive.
Just look what happened to the Woollahra that day. Just look what happened to how do I pronounce it? Just look at what happened to Woollahra. I'm pronouncing it my way. Just look at what happened to Woollahra. Fuck. Just look at what happened to Woollahra. Just look at what happened to Woollahra. Just look what happened to Woollahra railway station. Just look what happened to Woollahra rail. Because I'm sorry to tell you, but the reality is, they're just not the silver bullets that they think you are. What?